If you're a fan of mixed martial arts who follows the happenings in this community, you would already know about the disturbing news regarding the former UFC fighter Anthony Smith. On Monday, July 27th, after being forcibly removed from the Gretna Days Dance and Beer Garden, Anthony Smith was taken into custody after he threatened to kill his wife Michaela if she did not go home with him, grabbed her and forced her into his vehicle, and when she escaped from the vehicle while he was driving, Anthony Smith attempted to run her over with his car. And in addition to that, gunshots were reported as being heard ringing out from the Smith household. As a consequence, Anthony Smith has been charged with 3 felonies, with those being attempted first-degree domestic assault, terroristic threats, and first-degree false imprisonment. Anthony Smith's bond has been set at $500,000, with 2 other conditions of his bail being that he stays away from his wife and not leaving the state of Nebraska. And after this incident, the MMA community has descended upon Anthony Smith to poke fun at him, and frankly, rightfully so, especially since we all still remember what he said to Johnny Walker in the middle of the octagon during their fight.
I'm mad you attacked my family. Oh, you're attacking my family. Now what?
And now, it's not you're attacking my family, it's I'm attacking my family. And now, while that is kind of funny, when I look back at Anthony Smith's career, the best way I've found to describe it is a tragedy. It's a story of self-belief gone too far, to the point where it crosses completely into the world of delusion. And I think the context of his career, along with a few other factors, creates a darker and more depressing backdrop to this incident, which you just can't ignore when you see it. The tale of Anthony Smith is a story that not just other fighters, but all of us can learn something from. And now, allow me to explain why. Now, I'm sure that everybody watching this has seen these clips of Anthony Smith speaking about himself and his career before.
And John Jones is beatable. He's not that good. I might be the best 3-round fighter in the world. You know what I mean?
And that's why they get so angry about it. If I show up and I'm on point and I'm mentally where I need to be, I'll beat them all.
It is very clear that Anthony Smith had a history of overestimating his abilities as a fighter. Prior to his retirement from competition in the UFC, countless videos have been made compiling and reacting to his delusional comments. And Smith's talk had gotten to the point where even other fighters like TJ Dillashaw were calling him out for it.
I know TJ's under attack right now from a lot of people on the internet.
And he should be. He talked about our boy Lionheart, man.
Long story short, I don't know what his problem with me is, but I don't know why I allowed it to upset me so much. Like why I let someone like TJ Dillashaw upset me so much. Anybody who's been accused of cheating their entire career and been caught taking performance enhancing drugs and been a juice head his entire career and is like not in the testing pool, so we all know exactly what he's doing.
But I didn't say nothing bad. All I said was he's not going to be a champion.
That's bad.
What do you mean? He lost, and he lost to a guy that wasn't even near the top, and he didn't look very good. So why am I going to sit here and think a guy's going to be a champion when he lost, he gave up? Bro, you guys asked me a question if I thought he was going to be a champion. I said no. And then you're like, why not? It's like, he gives up. Like, he doesn't have that fight. He doesn't have that dog in him. I mean, but dude, the guy's got to sit there and be like, why are you going to have such, wear your feelings on your sleeve? I mean, he sits there and talks on people on broadcast all the time. I'm no stranger to it. He said some shit about me. It's like, whatever, dude. It's like, that's just how I feel. And if you don't like it, if the truth hurts, too fucking bad.
Right.
All of this, along with his increasingly worsening and worrying performances in the UFC octagon as his career drew to a close, which mostly consisted of Anthony Smith getting punched in the face up against the fence while having 2-on-1 wrist control and curling up in the fetal position while getting hammer-fisted, made everybody poke fun at him. He was Anthony on paper Smith, Anthony I'm better than John Jones Smith, or my personal favorite, Anthony the human pig hybrid Smith. The gap between his evaluation of himself and his actual abilities as a fighter was always amusing, especially with how often he was in front of the microphone being a desk analyst for the UFC and co-hosting the Believe You and Me podcast with Michael Bisping. However, what if I were to tell you that, from Anthony Smith's own personal warped perspective, becoming a UFC champion and a legend of the sport was completely feasible? And to explain why this is the case, let's examine Anthony Smith's early life and career. Anthony Smith was born in 1988 as the child of a black father and a white mother, and was raised in poverty by a single mother and his grandfather because his father was absent. Anthony Smith dropped out of high school when he was 17 years old, after which he began working a manual job as a concrete finisher, a position he would hold until 2016. And as soon as he dropped out of high school, Anthony Smith began his 2-decade-long MMA career in 2006, where he competed in the amateur leagues of the Nebraska regional scene, where he had 35 fights, finished his opponents in most of those fights, and won multiple local titles. And here, you can already see the roots behind Anthony Smith's delusional self-confidence. Imagine being a biracial high school dropout raised in poverty by a single mother who had nothing going for him, but then overcoming that adversity through mixed martial arts and becoming the best fighter on the regional scene. And in 2008, Anthony Smith started fighting professionally, which then almost immediately resulted in the first major hurdle of his career as an MMA fighter. After going 4-2, Anthony Smith went on a 4-fight losing streak from 2009 to 2010, where he was finished in every single fight. That left his record at 4 wins and 6 losses, a record that would get you classified by the matchmakers of major promotions as just another can on the regional scene meant to be fed to undefeated prospects to pad their records. Seriously, if you're a fighter who has 6 losses on your record, the UFC wouldn't even think about signing you nowadays unless you have something like 20 wins to balance those losses out. However, from that low point, Anthony Smith would mount a serious comeback in his career, going on to win 10 out of his next 11 fights, which led to him making his debut in his first major promotion, Strikeforce, in 2011. And from that point onwards, Anthony Smith would bounce back and forth between the regional scene and major promotions like Strikeforce and Bellator, and he even had one fight in the UFC at this time. But the trend with Anthony Smith's career was clear. He beat almost everybody on the regional scene, but as soon as he made it to the big leagues, he got KO'd or submitted in brutal fashion. But yet, Anthony Smith persevered, going on to win 2 separate regional titles in Cage Fury Fighting Championships and Victory FC, after which he was signed to the UFC in 2016 when he had a record of 24 wins and 11 losses. And now, look at this accomplishment from Anthony Smith's perspective. At one point, you had a losing record at 4 wins and 6 losses. You then overcame that adversity to fight in major promotions like Strikeforce and Bellator. And then, even after losing the big leagues, you scraped together some wins, won some regional titles, and then made it to the best promotion in the world, the UFC. And remember, while we as fans talk a lot of smack about lower level UFC fighters, calling them bums or trash or whatnot, just getting a UFC contract is a major, life-defining accomplishment for just about any MMA fighter. The careers of even the worst fighters in the UFC are built on the shattered dreams of thousands of fighters on the various regional scenes around the world, taking life-changing brain damage to fight in half-empty event halls and casinos with 100 or 2 people in attendance. Anthony Smith overcame the adversity he faced in his early pro career, crawled out of that world, and made it to the UFC. And then, after making it to the UFC, he went on to fight and beat former world champions and top contenders. He KO'd the former Bellator champion Hector Lombard. He KO'd the former Pride and UFC champion Shogun Rua. He KO'd Rashad Evans. And prior to fighting John Jones for the title, he submitted Volkan Oezdemir, a man who had just challenged Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight title. Now, granted, every single high-profile win that Anthony Smith got prior to fighting for the belt, with the exception of Oezdemir, was against competition that was completely and utterly washed. But, in Anthony Smith's head, the fact that remains is, I can beat world champions. I, Anthony Lionheart Smith, the guy who was raised by a single mother, who had to work as a concrete finisher while fighting in empty casinos for pennies, who at one time was 4-6 on the regional scene, have beaten world champions. If anything is going to fuel delusions of grandeur, it's going to be that. It was also just prior to his title shot that Anthony Smith got his job as an analyst with the UFC, which likely further boosted his sense of self-importance in the promotion. And then, after getting beaten to a pulp by John Jones, a fight during which Anthony Smith refused to take a DQ win after getting illegally kneed, Anthony Smith went on to submit Alexander Gustafsson, who, while totally past his goodbye date by that time, was still the man who gave John Jones the toughest test of his career up to that point, and is still considered to be one of the best fighters to never win a UFC title. And well, that's yet another win that will feed delusions. From that point onwards, Anthony Smith would proceed to get totally brutalized by Glover Teixeira on the ground, a fight during which he was literally handing his teeth to Jason Herzog, and then get outpointed by Alexander Rakic. And from there, Anthony Smith would go on to beat lower-level competition like Jimmy Crute and Ryan Spann, while losing to the upper to middle levels of the division like Magomed Ankalaev, Johnny Walker, and Khalil Roundtree. And in particular, the loss to Khalil Roundtree, where he got KO'd in pretty disturbing fashion, led many fans to call for his retirement. We'd already seen Anthony Smith take ridiculous amounts of damage in the Jones, Teixeira, and Ankalaev fights, and at this point we started seeing the memes about Anthony Smith being curled up in the fetal position while getting TKO'd. Everybody besides Anthony Smith himself plainly knew that he had no hopes of becoming a UFC champion, and that he was just going to get fed to prospects to build them up at this point. Which then leads me to the Vitor Pacino fight at UFC 301, which I believe is the fight that best demonstrates the state of mind that Anthony Smith has had throughout his entire career. Going into this fight, Vitor Pacino was an undefeated Brazilian prospect. And while UFC 301 was a card that took place in Rio de Janeiro, so you can clearly tell what the UFC wanted from this fight. However, Vitor Pacino ended up shooting a ridiculously stupid takedown along the fence, Anthony Smith jumped the ghillie, and Smith got a first-round submission win. And here is what the commentators said after Anthony Smith got that W.
He's got it. Oh, he did! Anthony Lionheart Smith! Gotta be careful with your neck there. Submit! Round one! Told you, you gotta watch that neck. Anthony Smith told you, there are levels to this game. Wow. He went out there and proved it. We can see on the side, Anthony's going guillotine. And he just came over to the booth and he said, I might get me some effing gold after all.
Yes, right after getting a single win outside the rankings against a guy with fight IQ that wouldn't be out of place in the amateur leagues, Anthony Smith says that he might win UFC gold. And while he said that in the heat of the moment, what it shows is Anthony Smith's unshakable belief in himself, and how the wins he's gotten throughout his UFC career have fed that belief to the point of delusion. However, delusions are still delusions, and that win against Pacino was the final one of Anthony Smith's UFC career, as he proceeded to go on to lose a tepid decision against Roman Dolidze and get finished in depressing fashion against Dominic Reyes and Zhang Mingyang, all losses which have aged pretty badly in retrospect. And after getting bloodied up by Zhang Mingyang, Anthony Smith retired. And even here in his retirement, the UFC helped feed Anthony Smith's delusions of grandeur, having organized a better retirement ceremony for him than they did for the likes of actual champions like Stipe Miocic. But what many of you don't know is, Anthony Smith ended up making a comeback. In April of 2026, Anthony Smith ended up taking a fight in Jorge Masvidal's Gamebred FC, a bare-knuckle MMA promotion where he ended up getting a first-round submission. A win which, as you might have guessed, further fueled his delusions. And that leads us to the present day, where he has been arrested for allegedly committing these heinous crimes against the mother of his children. And from here, I'm going to speculate a bit, but I think there are a number of factors that contributed to Anthony Smith doing what he did. First off, throughout his 20 years as an MMA fighter, Anthony Smith has taken an incredible amount of damage. If we include his most recent bare-knuckle MMA fight and the 35 amateur bouts he's had, Anthony Smith has fought a total of 95 times. And out of his 22 pro losses, Anthony Smith has been KO'd or TKO'd 12 times. And even in the decisions he's lost, he's taken a lot of punishment in those too. If anybody in the UFC is going to have CTE, it is going to be Anthony Smith. There's just no conceivable way you're going to have a healthy brain after getting knocked out that many times. Furthermore, the way that Anthony Smith got TKO'd is bad for brain health. Nowadays, the research is showing more and more that CTE is a result of cumulative strikes to the head, and not just single instances of brain trauma sustained from something like a single KO punch. The way that Anthony Smith lost in fights, especially towards the end of his career, had him taking hundreds of strikes to the head while he curled up in a ball. Although he ended up taking pride in being Lionheart, a fighter who supposedly fought until the bitter end, that just resulted in him taking more irreversible damage. And then you add in the factor of alcohol. Anybody who has watched Anthony Smith in interviews would know that he is a prolific drinker. And this incident between Anthony Smith and his wife took place after Smith was kicked out of a music festival and beer garden. And while we still don't know the specifics of the situation, I'm guessing that the reason why Smith forced his wife into the car, and she refused, was because he was intoxicated. And just like was the case with Dustin Poirier, consuming a neurotoxin while having sustained thousands of strikes to the head over the course of multiple decades is the cognitive equivalent of pouring gasoline onto a bonfire. It simply cannot end well. And then there's one final factor that I think could have contributed to Anthony Smith's downward spiral, and that is the way that his career played out and ended. As I explained throughout this video, Anthony Smith's life and career has been defined by him overcoming incredible adversity to get where he was. He came from a broken home, made it to the UFC despite being 4-6 at one point in his career, beat multiple former champions, became an analyst for the UFC, fought for the title, and could have literally won the belt if he had taken the DQ win against John. And while you could say that he would have never won the belt purely based off of merit, don't forget that for a while there, he was co-hosting a podcast with Michael Bisping, a fighter who nobody thought would ever be a champion. Anthony Smith failed at quite literally the final hurdle, and once he failed, he fell, and he fell hard. And now that his career is done with, I'm certain that reality must haunt him, which is likely the reason why he ended up taking that fight in Gamebred FC, just to experience that high of fighting again. Even though, if you think about it objectively, Anthony Smith indeed had a remarkably successful MMA career, especially when you consider where he started out. As I said earlier, it is an incredible achievement for a fighter to just make it to the UFC. But in Anthony Smith's case, not only did he get in after struggling on the regional scene, but he ended up getting ranked, had multiple main events, fought for the title, and ended up competing 25 times in the promotion. I mean, the average fighter who makes it to the UFC goes 0-2 or 1-3 in the promotion and ends up getting cut afterwards. While everybody makes fun of Anthony Smith for being a delusional failure, he at least got to the point where everybody knows that he's a delusional failure. And the major failing of his pro MMA career is literally failing to capture the world title. And personally, I think the key takeaway that we can all learn from the story of Anthony Smith is this. As time passes and we grow older, we need to learn how to let go and be content with our accomplishments. When we're young and hungry, we have infinite potential, and we may be able to overcome significant adversity in our lives to achieve great things. But then, once you reach the pinnacle of your field, but nonetheless fail to become the greatest in the world, you need to learn how to be content with your position in life. Learning how to let go later on and find peace with what you've been able to do throughout your career can be just as important as having the drive and hunger to become the best in the world you have earlier on. And that may be what we can all learn from the delusional tragedy of Anthony Smith.